We're approaching one full week of spring camp for the Detroit Tigers, and there are already a ton of observations to be made.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Welcome in, everyone, the halfway point of the week. And there is plenty to talk about today. As I mentioned, the cold open, I kind of hated the cold open. I meant to stop talking, and then I thought of like three more words that I could just slap on the end and just kind of went with it, and now we're here. I also said Wednesday really weird. I'm not restarting. We're already here. Like I said, we're approaching the 1 week mark. And there's already a lot of observations that have been made by people that are boots on ground, down in Lakeland. I am not one of those people. However, our beat writers and reporters and media do all such a fantastic job. And honestly, I want to give credit to the Tigers too, whether that's marketing and media or more PR, probably a combination of both. I feel like I've done a pretty good job of putting info out there in the Scott Harris era, info that like you expect to be out there or maybe want to be out there sometimes. Obviously, they can't put everything out there. That would be bad business. But there's a few things I want to go over today. We'll talk about the first look at infield drills and who was playing where. We'll talk a little bit about some pitchers that have been throwing this week that we haven't seen in a while. We'll talk Matt Vierling, who kind of is just playing all over, and what we've seen from him or what people have seen from him, and not myself, so far in camp. We will touch a little bit on some of the biggest news in baseball, which is Tony Clark stepping down from the executive position of the MLB Players Association. Tarik Skubal has a big role within the Players Association, so that matters for him. He made some comments about it, etc. Some more MLB news and notes at the very end of the show and what have you as well. So I want to start with the infield, though. I think that's probably it's not the biggest news, obviously. We'll talk about Tony Clark later, but I feel like it is the first thing that we have seen video of or I don't know, taken in, I guess. I can't find the wording for it so far this camp that is really tangible in terms of like an update. The infield for the first set of drills was Javy and McGonigle both at shortstop, not Booth at shortstop, which I found noteworthy. Torkelson obviously at first, no surprise. Gleyber at second. Colt Keith was the only person at third base, and Howie Uli was switching off at second base with Gleyber Torres taking reps there. So I want to start off with shortstop. I love the fact that Kevin McGonigle is playing shortstop, and a lot of people ask me all the time about what Javy's role is going to be on the team this year. I really don't think we see him in the outfield too terribly much. Not to say that it's going to be like zero, but I think that they are going to steer a little bit more back to the traditional, he's going to play shortstop a lot. I don't expect McGonigle to make the team out of camp. And I've said this a million times, but I expect the shortstop position to be a platoon of Javy and Zach McKinstry, at least for the first few months of the season. If I could talk today, that'd be great. So no surprises in that regard. The only thing that I do enjoy seeing is McGonigle at shortstop and not anywhere else. There is no shadow of a doubt that the biggest impact Kevin McGonigle could have on the Detroit Tigers, not what he will. I'm not predicting what position he's going to play long-term or even what level of offensive production he's going to play long-term. But his ceiling And the most impact that he could possibly have, if best case scenario works out for him, is being a really good offensive bat that also is sound defensively at shortstop. That is objectively the biggest possible impact that he could have. So I appreciate the fact that they're not just like, well, like, you know, we're talking about February, training camp, like February spring training. Get him reps at shortstop. And if you are listening to this and you're like, I don't think he can stick there, you might be right. But this early on in his career, it is absolutely worth exhausting that and trying as much as possible. So I appreciate that. Howie Uli at second base is somewhat interesting to me. I think that might just be I guess I'm saying I expect him to play kind of all over the diamond. I wouldn't be shocked to see him even at first base for a little bit. They seem to be putting kind of everybody at first base. Colt Keith is going to play some first. Jace Young's going to play some first. Obviously, Torkelson's going to be the opening day first baseman, barring injury. But it wouldn't shock me if Howie Uli maybe dabbled in first base, but also played a lot of third base and was kind of a platoon infielder that can play anything except for shortstop in the infield for the Detroit Tigers. The reason I say that is because I fully expect Howie Uli to play a similar role as Andy Ibanez has over the last few seasons with the Detroit Tigers. And that is what Andy Ibanez was, right? He played third, he played second, he even played a handful of first base for the Tigers. And I expect Howie Uli to get similar reps. Him at second base early, I don't take much stock in. I think that's probably more of just like making sure he's comfortable at the beginning of camp more than anything else. But either way, I found that noteworthy. And then Colt Keith at third base, not too much else to say. No surprise. I think that this is shaping up for Colt Keith to be the primary third baseman, at least on opening day. Now, that does leave the door open for the conversation surrounding Matt Vierling. I don't have a tangible, like hard-pressed update necessarily on Matt Vierling, but AJ Hinch did have some things to say about him and what we can expect to see from him in camp. We will talk about that and more right after this. First, though, got to talk to you about our good friends over at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. Well, when the pressure's on and you need to get the right hire, this is a job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. Indeed-sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping for the right candidate, and you're not just hoping that the perfect candidate just happens to stumble across your post online. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed-sponsored jobs. You can spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. When you need the right person, cut through the chaos, this is a simple job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. Indeed.com/podcast. Also, if you go right now, you can show support of this show by saying you heard about it at through this podcast, and you will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves. Again, that's Indeed.com/podcast. If you need to hire, this is a job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day, and we will, of course, be back tomorrow, as always. So thank you for tuning in and making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Be sure to check out the Everydayer Club. Baseball is back, and you can lock in by joining the Everydayer Club, which gets you ad-free episodes of this here show that you are tuning into and access to our group chat on Discord. It's members only, and of course, myself. For the next week or so, you can also use code SPRING for a free month of being an Everydayer. Just go to lockedonpodcasts.com/everydayer, or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Today, we talk about the sights and sounds and news and notes from almost one full week of camp for the Detroit Tigers. We talked about the infield a little bit before the break. I want to talk about Matt Vierling and where he kind of slides into that picture. Similar to Javy, I get asked about Matt Vierling all the time and just, what I expect his role to be, where he's going to play this upcoming season, etc. AJ Hinch spoke about Matt Vierling for the first time this camp, and I think that his quotes are interesting in that regard. He essentially said that Vierling was going to start off in corner outfield, get back into the swing of things, and then in a couple of weeks, they would get him in different gloves and have him playing around the field a little bit more. I think that that's probably just a case of this guy barely played baseball last year. Like, as crazy as it kind of flew by, like he was always just 15 days away from being healthy and then just really never got healthy. So I think that that's important to remember. And I think that that's probably this early in camp, all they're trying to do is get his sea legs back under him and just get him confident. He is the most confident in corner outfield. That's his natural position. Let's just get him working out there, get his arm back up to the level that it needs to be for a corner outfielder. And then they can start messing around with, is he a viable option at third base still, even having barely played last season? Obviously the center field question, with especially Parker Meadows being a lefty, even if he does hit, that's always going to be a platoon option in the back of AJ Hinch's mind. So I think that is much more to do with it than like, oh, he's only going to play corner outfield this year. I think that's probably a jump to conclusion here on February 18th. I think they're probably, again, just getting his confidence back up and getting him to game speed, if you will. Few more news and notes from the Tigers. We have a Game 1 spring training starter, and that is going to be Kader Montero. There's nothing to take out of that. There is no, like, obviously Tarik Skubal was the opening day starter. They're just, I'm sure that they have the entire spring, or at least the first 2 or 3 weeks mapped out in terms of, I guess, first 2 or 3 weeks. There's only 5 of spring training. I'm sure they have the first, handful of series mapped out and who they want pitching when, and exactly how many pitches they want them to throw, and exactly how many innings they're going to be on the mound for, etc. And that starts with Kader Montero. But this is a big spring for Kader Montero, right? This is a guy that obviously over the last 2 years has kind of carved out a role at being a swingman for the pitching staff and being a vital resource in that regard. I have never understood the people like Kader Montero would go out there and give up 3 runs in 5 innings and people would be mad. Like, what? He is probably going to start off the season in AAA. That is as good as you can have for a depth arm in your staff. And I think that he has shown tangible signs of improvement over the last few years. The reason why I'm giving you this whole word salad here, just to say that he's this first pitcher that we'll see in spring training, is because this isn't a throwaway guy either. This isn't like, oh, spring training, whoever starts doesn't matter at all, so who cares? This is a guy that is probably going to get a lot of looks in spring training, which is why they're trying to get him his first outing as soon as possible so they can get him back out there. I think that you're going to see him throw a lot of innings, not only just to build him up so that he's potentially a starter at the AAA level on opening day, but just because he's fighting for a roster spot. I'm talking about AAA like it's a foregone conclusion. It's definitely not. It's most definitely not for Kader Montero. He absolutely could be a long reliever, or again, that kind of, I always use Tyler Alexander as an example for this, like the kind of swingman role of being a long reliever or a starter when needed. I'm not sure why. Maybe he's just the most prominent one of the last, 6 years of Tigers baseball, but we've had plenty in my lifetime, I guess, as a Tigers fan. But anyway, just a weird side note there. That's always the example I use, and that's kind of the first person that comes to mind in that regard. But I do feel like this is a really important spring training for Kader Montero. It's also an important spring training for one Beau Brieske, who has been throwing already, obviously, this first week of camp. And I say obviously, he barely threw at all last season. So at least at the major league level. So I guess maybe that's not obvious. But good to see him back just in a Tigers uniform. He looks like he's in great shape. He looks big in like a good way. The interesting thing with Beau Brieske is just going to be what anything looks like. He had such a weird 2025. Not only was he hurt, he then tried to come back, we were told at least, healthy, and then was honestly, for lack of a better term, terrible. I mean, he was very unproductive at the major league level and got sent back down to Toledo, and then was pitching again. We were told was healthy, and was then struggling at times in Toledo. Now, Toledo ERA is like AAA in general. ERA can be very misleading. We've seen a lot of guys that have had really poor, ERAs in Toledo and then gotten called up and been really good. It's kind of a launching pad down there. But regardless, it's just good to see Brieske back at presumably full health. And I'm again, he's another guy that in my first roster projection, did not have making the opening day roster, but that could be ignorance on my part. I just don't know what I don't know. And we do have to remember that Brieske in 2024 was legitimately one of this team's best relievers in the second half. And during that magical Cinderella run, he was one of the more valuable relievers on the team. He got a save in the wild card round in Houston. He was the closer. He surpassed Jason Foley in that regard. Man, I miss Jason Foley. I hope he bounces back for the Giants this year. I really do. Gonna bring a tear to my eye. But this is, again, in the same way that I talk about Kader Montero, that this is a really important spring for Beau Brieske to kind of get his legs back under him as well, and get back to a point where not only he's just healthy, but that he looks, similar to how he did in 2024. A big question mark I have with Brieske is anything horizontal. We know the fastball is good. When he was fully healthy, even as a starter, he had a mid-90s fastball. When they put him in the bullpen, he was touching 99. So, we know that, especially as a pure reliever, he can be, or have rather, a solid fastball. We know that the changeup is probably his best pitch. I interviewed Brieske on this show, man, probably 3.5 years ago now. I want to say it was the end of 2021 even, maybe 2022. And he said that his favorite pitch was his changeup, and it was probably his most effective pitch. We know those two things, and we've known them for as long as he's been, really, since he was Tigers minor league pitcher of the year, 4 years ago or whatever it was now. But he's never had an effective east-west pitch. He's never had anything that has, he's thrown sliders. He's thrown, an attempt at sweepers, but none of them have ever been consistently effective at the major league level. And I feel like that's a need and a necessity for him still, if he wants to take that next step as a major league pitcher, no matter what the role is. Okay, let's talk about Tony Clark. We'll talk about Tarik Skubal's reaction to Tony Clark. We'll talk about the effect that this could have on Major League Baseball, and then a few other, small news and notes surrounding the some teams in the AL Central, if you will. We'll do that right after this. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience in an NBA Finals trip for two. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds an extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the NBA Finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered to win your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 3, third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate you all so much for tuning in as always. Talking about news and notes from the first week, almost full week of Tigers camp. Pitchers and catchers have been there for a week, but, the rest of the team, not quite. But the biggest news out of baseball on Tuesday is Tony Clark, the head of the executive of the Major League Baseball Players Association, put in his resignation on Tuesday morning. And that is massive news, not only just for the game of baseball and just who was representing the players is obviously very important. But this year, this happening a mere months before one of the biggest labor negotiations in the history of Major League Baseball. I saw somebody online, some prominent writer, say really every new labor negotiation, whatever the current labor negotiation is always the biggest in the history of baseball. And there's certainly an argument that this one is that. There are big question marks surrounding whether baseball will even be played in 2027. Surrounding, the salary cap and whether the owners are going to demand a salary cap and whether the players will ever cave and actually give a salary cap. We've already seen the effects that, and not only the MLBPA, but the MLBPA led by Tony Clark can have on baseball. There was obviously the labor negotiations coming out of COVID that cut a chunk into spring training and then, compressed the season. Didn't actually shorten it, if I remember correctly, but did compress it. So this is very important. Now, the reason for his resignation is one of the wildest things you will ever see. Apparently, he had some sort of inappropriate relationship with an in-law. That's all we've been given at the time of this recording. You can, speculate and do the math yourself on what that necessarily means in terms of like relation to him or whatever. But that is the report. That is straight from Jeff Passan, the biggest baseball writer breathing air right now. So what does that leave in terms of the pieces to pick up for the MLBPA, and what does that mean for labor negotiations? I can tell you right now, I actually don't think it means a whole heck of a lot in terms of the negotiations that are going on and if it changes the status of 2027. And one of the reasons I'm confident that it doesn't change much, not even like that's a good thing. I think we're probably going to get some games knocked off of 2027 at a minimum. I don't think the negotiations are in a great spot right now, but I don't think this changes that. If that's, maybe good news for you, I'm not sure. But Tarik Skubal spoke on it. Now, Skubal, it's important to remember, is on the MLBPA executive subcommittee. There's a group of, 10 or 11 guys that all play, obviously, in the major leagues that make up this subcommittee. And then each team also has a representative. The Tigers representative is Casey Mize. At the time that I record this, I don't believe Mize has spoken on the issue yet. But Skubal did. And also, I love that, A, Skubal is on there, B, that Paul Skeens is on there too. I think that is just absolutely awesome. But Skubal said that now obviously all the players are going to be like, this doesn't really change anything, because if they said anything differently, that would be a gross misuse of like a negotiation tactic in the eyes of, the owners and Major League Baseball. But the reason that he said it wouldn't change much is because Clark hasn't actually been the head of negotiations. They've had a completely different human being leading the negotiation with the owners. And so I for that reason, I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but I really don't think that that changes a whole lot. It changes the perception. It changes who the face of the MLBPA is. I mean, Clark literally was the face of the Players Association for the better part of his I don't know, tenure being involved with the Players Association. But in terms of like the status of 2027 and is this good or bad? I really don't think this moves the needle at all. Perception wise, it's certainly not great though. And they don't have an immediate answer of like, this guy's immediately going to step in and fill that role. I'm not even sure they necessarily will fill that role, to be completely honest with you, from now until when they when the lockout would, in theory, or strike, whatever it technically ends up being, would start. All of that is to say, this is huge news. I'm not trying to downplay the magnitude of this event. It's massive. It will obviously affect the Players Association. I just don't think that it, at least today, will have too much effect. Now, who they bring in to replace him, if they choose somebody immediately, obviously that matters. And if they pick somebody that comes in and is like, we're not playing until 2030 if they offer a salary cap, then like obviously that matters, right? Whoever, the next quote unquote man in charge is going to be will have an effect. But Clark stepping down in a vacuum, huge news, but I don't think it changes the status of 2027 necessarily. The reason why is because we're screwed either way. That's what I've been like trying to articulate without saying, and I'm just realizing that I'm just not going to try to sugarcoat that. I think we're completely hosed either way. Whether it was Clark or whether it's nobody or whether it's somebody else, I think we're completely toast in 2027, regardless of who's, the executive director of the Players Association. Okay, great. Now we can move on. The only other thing I really want to talk about is can I speak? Is just the injury update of Pablo López, who is the ace of I would imagine he would have been the ace on opening day. It's either him or Joe Ryan, certainly for the Minnesota Twins. We talked about the Minnesota Twins projections yesterday and how some people are still relatively high-ish on the Minnesota Twins. And I was certainly not. This, potentially has a chance to make me look much smarter than I actually am, as it looks like Pablo López has a serious UCL injury. And if that is the case, that is just another catastrophic blow to the Minnesota Twins and their chances in the American League Central this year. That also means that there's a handful of wins that would have probably been on the table, or at least closer games that would have been on the table that now will be off the table for AL Central opponents. And I think that certainly matters. So we will keep tabs on that. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. And we will, of course, be back tomorrow. I appreciate you all greatly. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.